So picture this. The entire Galactic Council is basically having a panic attack. And I mean a full-on existential crisis level meltdown. 3 whole cycles. And these things called the Devourer swarms are just munching through star systems like they're an all-you-can-eat buffet. But this isn't just any ordinary invasion we're talking about here. This is a kind of nightmare scenario that makes ancient spacefaring civilizations wake up screaming. Let me paint you a picture of just how bad things had gotten. The Galactic Council chambers, which usually buzz with the confident chatter species who had conquered the stars, had turned into something resembling a funeral parlor. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in stunned silence, their various forms of communication reduced to worried whispers and panic-clicking sounds. The air recyclers couldn't keep up with the stress pheromones being pumped out by dozens of different alien biologies. We're talking about civilizations that have been around for thousands of years, species that had mastered technologies humans couldn't even dream of. The Zephyrians, for instance, had been manipulating pure energy since before Earth's continents had finished drifting into their current positions. These guys could literally reach out with their minds and bend lightning to their will, turn stars into weapons, and redirect the flow of time itself in small pockets of space. They'd been the galaxy's go-to problem solvers for over 2 millennia. When something seemed impossible, you called the Zephyrians. Except now, radio silence. Their entire home system had gone dark 3 weeks ago. Then there was the mighty Korthak Empire with their legendary war fleets. Picture this. Ships the size of small moons, armed with weapons that could crack planets in half, crewed by warriors who had spent centuries perfecting the art of space combat. The Korthak had never lost a major battle in their entire recorded history. Their military doctrine was studied in academies across the galaxy. Their battle tactics were considered works of art. These weren't just soldiers. They were the ultimate expression of organized warfare, refined over generations of conquest and victory. And the Devourers had turned their entire armada into space scrap in less than 6 hours. But here's where it gets really crazy. Even these weird beings called the Void-Touched, who had basically evolved past having physical bodies, just noped out to another dimension entirely. Think about that for a second. These entities existed as pure consciousness, floating through space without needing ships or weapons or anything physical at all. They could phase in and out of reality like it was no big deal, manipulate matter at the quantum level, and had spent the last few thousand years acting like the wise, untouchable observers of galactic civilization. If something threatened them, they just stepped sideways into a parallel dimension and waited out. But not this time. This time, they packed up their entire civilization and fled to dimensions so far removed from our reality that their goodbye message took 3 days just to translate into something the Council's computers could understand. The emergency sessions had been going nonstop for weeks. Every military strategist, every brilliant scientist, every ancient wise species had thrown their best ideas at the wall, and nothing was sticking. They'd tried energy weapons that could disintegrate entire asteroids. The Devourers just absorbed the energy and got stronger. They'd attempted to use quantum disruption fields that could tear apart matter at the subatomic level. The swarm adapted in real time and kept coming. Biological warfare, psychological attacks, even attempts to reason with whatever intelligence might be controlling the swarm. Nothing worked. The really terrifying part wasn't just that the Devourers were unstoppable. It was how they operated. These weren't mindless beasts or even particularly aggressive conquerors. They moved with purpose, with intelligence, systematically consuming everything in their path. They'd show up in a system, and within hours, every planet, every space station, every artificial structure would be gone. Not destroyed, consumed, absorbed into their growing mass of biomechanical ships that seemed to learn and evolve with every system they devoured. So what do you do when you're facing extinction and you've tried everything? When every expert has thrown up their hands? When your most powerful civilizations have either fallen silent or fled to other dimensions? When your best military minds are openly talking about the end of galactic civilization as we know it? You get desperate. Really, truly desperate. That's when somebody, and nobody remembers exactly who, suggested the unthinkable. Send out a galaxy-wide SOS on every frequency imaginable, from the most advanced quantum communication channels down to primitive radio waves that barely traveled faster than light. broadcast the coordinates of the next predicted devourer target, and hoped that someone, anyone, anywhere in the galaxy might have an idea that the collected wisdom of ancient civilizations had somehow missed. It was a long shot that made lottery tickets look like sure bets, but when you're staring down the extinction of everything you've ever known, even impossible hope starts looking pretty attractive. Then something incredible happens. A message comes back from this tiny spiral arm that most of the galaxy barely remembered existed. And I'm talking about a part of space so backwater that most galactic maps didn't even bother labeling it properly. It just showed up as outer rim, various primitive species, if it showed up at all. But suddenly, cutting through all the static and emergency chatter, comes this clear, confident transmission. It's from humans. Yeah, those upstart mammals who only figure out faster-than-light travel like yesterday in galactic terms. The message is almost insulting in its simplicity. Got your coordinates. We're coming. Be there in 6 days. That's it. No request for additional information. No questions about enemy capabilities. No asking for backup or support. Just a straightforward, we're on our way. Like they were responding to a dinner invitation instead of a galaxy-wide cry for help against an unstoppable force of destruction. The council members are literally looking at each other like, are these guys serious? And you have to understand, this isn't just surprise we're talking about here. This is the kind of bewildered confusion you get when your 5-year-old nephew confidently announces he's going to fix your broken car engine. The silence in the council chambers was so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. Here's a species that's been spacefaring for maybe a few generations, and I mean barely a few generations. Most of the council members had personally witnessed the humans taking their very first baby steps into interstellar space. These mammals had gone from throwing rocks at each other to building starships in what the galaxy considered a cosmic eye blink. Their technology looked like it was built in someone's garage by enthusiastic amateurs who had more determination than sense. Let me give you some context here. When humans first showed up on the galactic scene, they were treated like that enthusiastic new kid who joins the chess club and immediately challenges the grandmaster. Cute, but obviously out of their league. Their ships were these bulky, inefficient things that looked like flying bricks compared to the elegant curves and energy-efficient designs that had been perfected over millennia. Human computers still use physical circuits when most advanced civilizations had moved to pure energy matrices centuries ago. Their weapons were basically controlled explosions, the kind of crude chemistry-based warfare that most species had abandoned back when they were still figuring out agriculture. The Galactic Council had files on humanity, of course. Every species got a basic assessment when they achieved faster-than-light travel. The human file was pretty thin and not particularly impressive. Recent technological development, check. Aggressive tendencies during their primitive phase, noted with concern. Shows promise but lacks experience. The diplomatic way of saying, give them a few thousand years and maybe they'll amount to something. Most council members remember the humans' first diplomatic contact. They'd shown up in this awkward, boxy ship that looked like it had been welded together by enthusiastic mechanics rather than designed by engineers. Their ambassador had been this nervous woman named Beth who kept apologizing for everything and seemed genuinely amazed that aliens existed. Sweet, really, but hardly the stuff of galactic legend. And now these same humans think they can handle what wiped out civilizations that were ancient when their planet was still forming? The Korthak Empire had been conquering star systems when humans were still figuring out how to make fire. The Zephyrians had mastered energy manipulation when Earth was nothing but molten rock. These were civilizations that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare, developing technologies that bordered on magic, accumulating wisdom that came from surviving countless galactic conflicts. The debate that broke out in the council chambers was something to behold. Half the representatives were convinced this was some kind of communication error. Maybe the humans had misunderstood the message, thought they were being invited to some kind of cultural exchange instead of a last-ditch battle against extinction. Others wondered if it was a translation problem, like maybe we're coming meant something completely different in human languages, like we're praying for you, or good luck with that. The more cynical council members figured the humans had simply lost their minds. Facing the end of everything they'd ever known, maybe their primitive brains had just snapped and defaulted to some kind of evolutionary death wish. It wouldn't be the first time a young species had chosen to go out swinging rather than face the slow horror of inevitable extinction. But the really unsettling part was how confident that transmission had sounded. There was no fear in that voice, no hesitation, no request for backup or additional information, just matter-of-fact certainty, like they dealt with galaxy-threatening swarms of destruction every Tuesday. Most figured they'd either chicken out once they really understood what they were facing, or show up just in time to become devourers' snacks, while the rest of the galaxy watched in horrified fascination. Nobody expected what was actually coming. But when Admiral Jake Morrison and the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, everyone's jaws hit the floor. And I mean literally, species that didn't even have jaws were somehow managing to drop them anyway. The moment those hyperspace rifts tore open and the human armada started pouring through, every single observer in the system just froze in absolute shock. Thousands of ships appeared in perfect formation, and let me tell you, this wasn't just impressive. It was downright terrifying in its precision. These weren't the sleek, elegant vessels most species preferred, with their flowing curves and artistic designs that looked more like space-age sculptures than military hardware. No, these things look like flying fortresses that had been designed by someone who had spent way too much time thinking about how to hurt things really, really effectively. Picture this: massive, angular beasts of metal and composite armor, all sharp edges and brutal efficiency. They looked like someone had taken the concept of military vessel and stripped away every single unnecessary element until only the pure essence of this thing exists to win fights remained. The hulls were covered in layers of reactive armor plating that seemed to shift and adjust as you watched, like the ships themselves were constantly preparing for incoming fire. Weapon ports dotted every surface, not arranged in the elegant, symmetrical patterns that galactic ship designers favored, but placed wherever they'd be most effective in an actual fight. These ships bristled with weapons that seemed almost primitive but somehow terrifying in their directness. Where other species had developed energy weapons that looked like elegant beams of light, human weapons looked like they were designed to physically grab their targets and shake them apart. Massive railguns that could probably punch holes through small moons. Missile pods that held enough firepower to level cities. Point defense systems that move with the kind of mechanical precision that suggested they'd been tested against everything the human imagination could dream up. The fleet composition made absolutely no sense by galactic standards. Most civilized species organized their fleets around the idea of specialized roles. You had your elegant command ships that stayed safely in the back, your fast scout vessels that danced around the edges of battle, your heavy weapons platforms that delivered devastating but slow attacks from long range. It was all very organized, very predictable, very civilized. But the human fleet? It looked like someone had thrown military doctrine out the window and started over from scratch. They had these massive dreadnought-class vessels that seemed built to wade into the thick of battle and just start swinging. Support ships that looked more like mobile factories than traditional logistics vessels. And swarms of smaller craft that moved in patterns nobody recognized. Not scouts, not fighters, but something entirely new that made experienced military observers nervous just watching them. But here's the thing that really got everyone's attention: the way they moved. There was something about the mechanical precision of their formation that suggested these humans had thought about this very differently than anyone else. Every ship knew exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly what its role was, exactly how it fit into the larger picture. When one ship adjusted its position, 20 others would automatically shift to accommodate it, like they were all part of some vast, thinking machine. The coordination was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Most fleets move like collections of individual ships that happen to be working together. The human fleet moved like a single organism with thousands of parts, each one perfectly synchronized with all the others. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. And then there were the smaller details that really drove home just how differently humans approach warfare. Their ships had names painted on their hulls. Not designation numbers or functional classifications, but actual names like Defiant and Retribution and No Retreat. They had artwork on some of the larger vessels, symbols, and images that seemed to mean something important to the crews inside. These weren't just military assets to the humans. They were extensions of their personalities, their hopes, their determination. The communication arrays were broadcasting constantly, but not just tactical information. Music was coming through on some channels, voices calling out encouragement, even what sounded like jokes and casual conversation. Most species maintain strict communication discipline during military operations, but the humans seemed to be treating this like some kind of family gathering where everyone just happened to be flying heavily armed spaceships. Morrison's voice cut through every communication channel with the kind of confidence that made seasoned military commanders sit up and pay attention. Human expeditionary force here. All friendly ships. Back off to safe distance. We've got this. There was no boasting in that voice, no false bravado. Just a matter-of-fact certainty of someone who had looked at an impossible situation and decided it was just another problem to solve. The reaction in the Council observation vessels was immediate and profound. Species that had been around for thousands of years were suddenly questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare, about tactics, about what it meant to face an enemy. The humans hadn't just arrived. They brought with them a completely different way of thinking about conflict that nobody had ever seen before. And the really unsettling part? They looked like they were actually looking forward to this fight. What happened next completely rewrote the galactic understanding of warfare. And I'm not talking about some minor tactical innovation or a clever new weapon design. This was the kind of paradigm shift that makes military academies throw out their textbooks and start over from scratch. While every other species had tried to out-tech the Devourers, building bigger energy weapons, more sophisticated shields, faster ships with better maneuverability, humans had done something totally different. They'd gone full detective mode on these things. Picture a species that had spent millennia hunting mammoths across frozen tundras, learning to read tracks in the snow, studying animal behavior patterns with the patience of persistent predators who knew that understanding your prey was more important than being stronger than it. That's exactly what humans had been doing for the past 6 months while the galaxy was panicking. While everyone else was throwing increasingly desperate military solutions at the problem, human scientists, military analysts, and even civilian researchers had been poring over every single piece of data they could get their hands on. They'd analyzed debris from destroyed ships, studied attack patterns from previous Devourer encounters, even gone back through historical records to trace the swarm's movements across the galaxy. What they'd discovered was something that made every other species feel a little embarrassed they'd missed it. The Devourers weren't just mindless consumers. They followed predictable patterns, had specific vulnerabilities, and most importantly, they adapted to threats in ways that could actually be anticipated if you knew what to look for. The biomechanical swarms that steamrolled entire civilizations suddenly found themselves getting countered at every turn in ways that seemed almost supernatural. When Devourer ships tried their usual tactic of absorbing energy weapons, human ships switched to kinetic bombardment, old-fashioned chunks of metal flying at ridiculous speeds. When the swarms adapted their armor to deflect projectiles, humans started using plasma charges that turned their own kinetic rounds into localized stars on impact. But here's where it gets really interesting. Human ships didn't try to dance around elegantly like most galactic fleets preferred. No graceful formations or artistic maneuvers that looked good in military parades. These guys got up close and personal, trading punches like bare-knuckle boxers who've been training in back-alley gyms their whole lives. The observers watching from safe distance couldn't believe what they were seeing. Human destroyers would charge straight into swarms of Devourer vessels, taking hits that should have vaporized them, but somehow stay in the fight through sheer bloody-minded determination and redundant armor systems. When their shields failed, they didn't retreat to recharge like civilized species. They kept pressing forward, using their own damaged hulls as battering rams. When they ran out of ammunition, they turned their own ships into guided missiles, their crews evacuating in escape pods while their vessels became improvised explosives with yields that could crack asteroids. But even that wasn't the most shocking part. The really scary thing was watching human crews volunteer for these suicide runs with the kind of casual acceptance that suggested they'd been planning for this possibility all along. The really scary part, though? They were learning in real time, each destroyed ship uploading its final data to make the whole fleet smarter. This wasn't just battlefield adaptation. This was evolution happening at light speed. Every time a Devourer vessel destroyed a human ship, that ship's final moments were being broadcast to every other vessel in the fleet, analyzed instantly, and turned into new tactical knowledge. Human ships that survived the first wave of contact came back, swinging with completely different strategies 15 minutes later. Weapon systems were being recalibrated mid-battle based on data from ships that no longer existed. Formation patterns shifted and evolved as if the entire fleet was a single learning organism that got smarter every time it took damage. The galactic observers were watching something unprecedented, a species that treated every defeat as a learning opportunity rather than a reason to retreat. When devourer swarms used new tactics, human commanders would actually sound excited over the communication channels, like they were being presented with interesting puzzles to solve rather than deadly threats to survive. Most shocking of all was the speed of human adaptation. Other species spent years developing new military doctrines, decades testing new strategies, centuries refining their approaches to warfare. Humans were doing it in minutes, sometimes seconds, turning each battle into a real-time evolution of tactical thinking that left seasoned military observers struggling to keep up. By the third hour of combat, the devourer swarms that had effortlessly consumed ancient civilizations were actually retreating from sections of battlefield, something that had never been recorded in any previous encounter. The biomechanical ships that had seemed unstoppable were now moving defensively, trying to adapt to threats that kept changing faster than their neural networks could process. The humans weren't just fighting the devourers. They were out-evolving them, turning the swarm's own adaptability against them in ways that rewrote everything the galaxy thought it knew about how intelligent species conducted warfare. It was beautiful, terrifying, absolutely unstoppable. When the last devourer's ship went dark, its consciousness permanently scrambled by weapons designed to target not just matter and energy, but the actual neural networks that made them unstoppable. The galaxy got real quiet. And I mean the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you question everything you thought you knew about the universe. Picture this scene across dozens of star systems, on thousands of observation vessels. Representatives from hundreds of civilizations just stopped talking. The constant chatter of military communications, the nervous updates from field commanders, the panicked discussions in council chambers, all of it just died away as everyone tried to process what they'd just witnessed. These young mammals, with their short lifespans and violent history, had just pulled off what ancient, wise civilizations couldn't even dream of. The Zephyrians, who had mastered energy manipulation for millennia, had been completely stumped by the Devourers. The Korthak Empire, with their legendary military prowess refined over thousands of years, had been swept aside like space dust. Even the void-touched, beings who existed beyond physical reality itself, had fled other dimensions rather than face this threat. But humans, these relative newcomers who had been spacefaring for barely a few generations, who still used primitive chemical rockets in some of their older ships, who fought with weapons that looked like they'd been assembled in garage workshops, they'd not only stopped the unstoppable force, but had made it look almost easy by the end. The aftermath was something to behold. Human recovery ships were already moving through the debris field, their crews working with a kind of methodical efficiency that suggested they planned for this phase of operations too. They weren't celebrating or taking victory laps. They were collecting data, salvaging useful technology, and treating the whole thing like just another day at the office. But Admiral Morrison's final transmission? That's what really changed everything. His voice came through on all frequencies with that same matter-of-fact tone that had become so unsettling to galactic observers. Devourers neutralized. We've cataloged all their tech. But here's the thing. Our analysis shows this was just a scouting party. The real swarm is sitting outside our galaxy, and they'll be here in 50 cycles. Might want to start preparing. The silence that followed that announcement was deafening. If you thought the galaxy was quiet before, this was like someone had just sucked all the sound out of space itself. Council representatives who had been preparing victory speeches suddenly found themselves staring at their notes in horror. Military commanders who had been planning celebration ceremonies were frantically pulling up star charts and invasion projections. A scouting party. What they had just witnessed. The force that had consumed entire civilizations, that had made ancient species flee to other dimensions, that had represented the most serious threat the galaxy had ever faced, was just a scouting party. The advance guard. The opening act. And here's the really terrifying part. Morrison delivered this information like he was discussing the weather. No panic, no fear, just casual professional interest in a larger tactical situation. Like he was already 3 steps ahead, already thinking about how to handle the main event when it arrived. The implications hit different species at different speeds, but when they hit hard. If this was just a scouting force, what would the main swarm look like? How many ships? How much more advanced? How much more dangerous? The mathematical projections being run in council computers were producing numbers that most civilizations couldn't even comprehend. But here's what really changed the galaxy's perspective on humanity. It wasn't just that they'd won, it was how they'd won. They hadn't gotten lucky, hadn't stumbled onto some miracle weapon, or discovered some ancient technology that saved the day. They'd approached an impossible problem with systematic, methodical thinking and turned it into a solvable puzzle. More importantly, Morrison's casual announcement about the bigger threat coming wasn't delivered as a warning or a plea for help. It was delivered as useful information for planning purposes. Like he was already assuming that 50 cycles would be enough time to prepare for whatever was coming next. Not that they could prepare, not hoping they might find a solution, just matter-of-fact certainty that this was a problem that could be solved if approached correctly. The galaxy had been saved by humanity, but in that moment of salvation, they realized they'd just met a species that didn't just fight to survive. They fought like losing wasn't even an option. Like defeat was just a temporary setback in a larger strategic picture that always, eventually, led to victory. For the first time in galactic history, ancient civilizations found themselves looking at a young species and thinking not, how cute, they'll learn eventually, but maybe we should be asking them for advice. The mammals from the backwater spiral arm had just demonstrated something that fundamentally changed how everyone thought about warfare, about problem solving, about what it meant to face impossible odds. And Morrison's final words before the human fleet jumped back to hyperspace? See you in 50 cycles. We'll be ready. Not, we hope we'll be ready, or maybe we can figure something out. Just simple, confident certainty that when the real threat arrived, humanity would be waiting. The galaxy suddenly had 50 cycles to figure out whether that confidence was justified. Something told them it was.